The subject of today's video is a Texas high school football legend, has thrown for over 8,000 yards and 76 touchdowns in his career, and has also made his mark on the ground as he's ran for over 2,000 yards and 32 touchdowns in his 6-year career. At one point, he was the frontrunner for the Heisman Trophy. He was seen as the savior of Miami football, and even though there was all this hype, it has seemingly all vanished, and as of right now, it looks like his college football career is over. In today's video, we're going to talk about D'Eriq King. Many of you guys know him as the star quarterback who came from Houston and went to Miami. As I said earlier, he was a Heisman frontrunner at one point and has been one of the most productive quarterbacks in the last few years of college football. Today, I want to talk about his rise as a player, his 6-year college career so far, and what has ultimately gone wrong and what I think will happen next for him. But before we get into today's video, nearly 80% of you guys are not subscribed to the channel for this season, and I know we can do better than that, so be sure to hit that button, smash that like button for the algorithm, and turn on post notifications so you never miss when I upload. Now, let's get started and talk about what happened to D'Eriq King. In order to understand what has gone wrong and what has happened to D'Eriq King, we need to go back in time and see how he became a big-time player to begin with. He grew up in an area that is seemingly full of football talent, and it is a state called Texas. I'm obviously being sarcastic, as they are the best producer of talent in all of college football. He also just so happened to grow up in the same town as another big-time quarterback that you've probably heard of. His name? Kyle Trask. Both of them would fall in love with the game of football, and they wanted to become the hometown hero for their school, like so many kids want to. Kyle Trask and D'Eriq King became the talk of Manville High School, and they both would go on to do very well. D'Eriq would throw for over 10,000 yards in his high school career, and he was doing this at the Texas 6A level. He threw for more touchdowns in his career than guys like Kyler Murray, but there was a perception around him that he didn't like. Since he was 5'10", many thought he would make a position switch because they saw him as an athlete instead of a quarterback. Meanwhile, his backup was a 6'5" guy who got interest from premier schools like Florida. D'Eriq didn't understand this because he was putting up 5 to 6 touchdowns a game at times, and he wondered why premier schools didn't want to take a chance on him. Despite not having a quote premier school offer, D'Eriq was a pretty hot commodity on the recruiting market, and tons of schools wanted him. The first Power 5 school to offer him was Texas Tech, and they were then under head coach Cliff Kingsbury. Man, I wonder what they could have done with him. Schools like Baylor and Michigan State wanted him to switch to wide receiver, but there were a few guys who actually became role models to King. TCU was a good program at the time, and quarterback Trevon Boykin was someone who inspired him. Because of this, D'Eriq decided to commit to TCU after his junior year, and many thought he could be the eventual successor to Boykin. This was short-lived though, as they now expected him to move to wide receiver, so he reopened his recruitment. He ended up choosing Houston because of Tom Herman and another role model. His name was Greg Ward Jr. In case you don't remember, he was Tom Herman's star quarterback for the Cougars back in the day and led them to the top of the college football world at one point. Just like King, he was an undersized quarterback and he helped lead the Cougars to a ton of success and is now a wide receiver for the Eagles in the NFL. D'Eriq committed to Houston, and this was likely going to be a really good fit for him. According to 24/7 Sports, he was a borderline 4-star recruit, the number 18 athlete, and the 396th best player in the class of 2016. He was going to be a good player in college, but he was going to have to wait his time and face some adversity first. So going into the 2016 season, the Houston Cougars had a ton of hype, and they opened up the season number 15 in the country. In case you remember, they actually beat number 3 Oklahoma in that week 1 matchup, and that was not their only top 3 win of the year. Flash forward to late November, they also upset number 3 Louisville led by Lamar Jackson, and you'd think maybe this team was a playoff contender. Well, I made a video about it in the past, but they lost to Navy and SMU and threw away any chance of getting to the playoff. King, on the other hand, got to experience some success where he caught, threw, and ran a couple of passes. In 2017, his role would end up expanding. He wouldn't really play in the first 5 games, but he'd actually start 5 games late in the year. His first start would come on the road in a win over number 17 USF, and his best statistical game came against Eastern Carolina as he combined for 4 touchdowns in that game. Because of that, he led Houston to a bowl game where they would play against Fresno State in the Hawaii Bowl, and they would lose. King finished the year throwing for 1,260 yards with 7 touchdowns. He also ran the ball for 379 yards and 8 more scores. He was just now starting to scratch the surface of how good he could be. At the time, the Cougars were now in the 2nd year under head coach Major Applewhite, and the 2018 season was a little bit disappointing. He combined for 6 touchdowns in a win over Arizona early on in the year, and despite 6 touchdowns, they lost on the road to Texas Tech. He then led them to 5 straight wins before a tough finish to the regular season. They lost on the road to SMU and at home to Temple, and King had led them to an 8-5 record. Sadly, his season was cut short, as in their 11th game, he would suffer a non-contact knee injury. Because of that, he would miss their bowl game, and only 2 quarterbacks had more touchdowns than him, and that was Kyler Murray and Dwayne Haskins. How good was King in 2018? Well, let me read his stats. He passed for 2,982 yards with 36 touchdowns, and also ran for 674 yards with 14 more touchdowns on the ground. Somehow, he's only a second-team all-conference selection, but King was a new star in college football, and he was going to break the world in 2019. They had a new coach come in after Major Applewhite was fired, and it was Dana Holgorsen from West Virginia. Houston would get off to a rough start, as they would get blown out by Oklahoma in their first game, and then lose 2 of their next 3 matchups. Because of that, King would only play in 4 games before he would decide the redshirt. This was one of the more controversial moves that we've seen in the last few years, as Holgorsen basically decided to tank. He wanted to keep King and some of the other better players for the following season, so it became a disastrous year for the Cougars. In 4 games, he threw for 663 yards and combined for 12 touchdowns. King was a hot commodity, and some even thought he could go to Oklahoma for 2020. This did not end up happening, but King would decide to enter the transfer portal, and now the sweepstakes began. There were 4 schools that King considered, and it included Miami, Arkansas, LSU, and Maryland. In the end, though, he decided to go over to Miami because they were in need of a starting quarterback. It was a big-time program, and he liked the culture and where the school was at. Because of the loss of Jaron Williams, King was going to be the starter, and there was a lot of hype for the Canes last year. Sadly, King would be hit with a very tough circumstance as his father would tragically pass away during the offseason. He let this fuel him, as in his first 3 games with the Miami Hurricanes, he played spectacular. He combined for 7 touchdowns in his first 3 games, and also combined for nearly 1,000 yards. At this point, he was considered the Heisman frontrunner for his numbers and what he had done so far, but a lot of people knew it would be fool's gold. He would need to perform in their biggest game of the year against Clemson, and unfortunately, it would not happen. He went 12 of 28 for 121 yards with no touchdowns and 2 interceptions in that matchup, and the Canes lost 42-17 at the hands of the Tigers. After that, his Heisman campaign basically fell apart, despite him putting up pretty solid numbers. He threw for 4 touchdowns in a win over Pitt, had 5 touchdowns in a road win over NC State, and then combined for 4 touchdowns in a road win over Duke. He had led the Canes to 5 straight wins, and they had a gigantic matchup against number 17 North Carolina at home. In what was one of the worst defensive performances in college football history, the Canes let up nearly 600 rushing yards to Michael Carter and Javonte Williams, and the Tar Heels came into Coral Gables and won 62-26. In the final home game of the 2020 season, King would throw for 239 yards with 2 touchdowns. They were 9-2 heading into the Cheez-It Bowl with number 21 Oklahoma State, and they ended up losing that game. A big reason, though, is because King hurt his knee. He went down with an ACL tear, and this was a very tough way to end the season for him. In his first year at the Canes, he threw for 2,686 yards with 23 touchdowns, 538 yards on the ground, 4 touchdowns, and a 64% completion percentage. It was a pretty good year, and because of that, he was seen as one of the top quarterbacks going into 2021, and he signed a ton of NIL deals and was a dark horse Heisman Trophy candidate once again. Sadly, he just hasn't been the same player in 2021 so far, as in their first game against Alabama, he only had 179 yards with 2 interceptions, and basically nothing happened on the ground game. Against Appalachian State, he did find himself a little bit as he threw for 200 yards and ran for nearly 100 yards, but he had no touchdowns. Against Michigan State, he threw 2 touchdowns compared to 2 interceptions, and something was seriously wrong with him. Since then, we have found out that King has been dealing with an injury. He tried to fight and play for his team, but it looks like it's going to be too much, and he's now going to get surgery that is likely going to end his college football career. When you take a look at what King has done in 6 years, he's thrown for over 8,000 yards and 76 touchdowns, and has also ran for over 2,000 yards and 32 touchdowns. He's had a 63% completion percentage, has won some big games, and will go down as one of the best quarterbacks in Houston history, and had a very memorable season for the Canes. In terms of his NFL future, I think King is a scrappy, hard-working guy who's extremely athletic, so I think he will find a place in the NFL. But in terms of him being an NFL quarterback, I don't think any scout or really anyone believes that's going to happen, but maybe he'll prove us all wrong. In all likelihood, he'll likely move to wide receiver, or maybe he won't even play football at all. He seemingly has gotten really interested with NIL and a lot of business opportunities, and maybe he will think it's time to move on from football and enter the next era of his life. I don't really know though, but D'Eriq King was a really fun player to watch, and I remember him breaking out at Houston and all the hype he had at Miami. I'm really happy I got to watch him over the last few years, and he was the definition of what was great about college football. He was someone who overcame all the odds and had a spectacular career, and I know he's going to be successful in whatever he does. So today we talked about the rise and fall of D'Eriq King and what I think is going to happen next, and now I want to know your thoughts. How good was D'Eriq King in college? What is going to happen to him next? And if you're a Miami fan, what the heck is going on with your team? Be sure to let me know down in the comment section. Subscribe if you are new here. Let me know another topic I can do next, and check out all my other videos on the end screen. I hope to see you guys again soon, but until next time, peace.